Read Me. Part 12 by KB Hurst. The beast paced around my living room while I held the Read Me book. I was hoping to find the answers to where the little girl was. The beast unnerved me, and his teeth hung from his mouth in a menacing scowl. I could relate to his anger, and I could relate to the fear that the little girl must feel, as she was so similar to me. I hoped that perhaps the book might offer some answers on how to save the child from a not-so-nice man with ill intentions, aka Edmund Wright. I held the book in my hands and concentrated. There was something about it now that didn't make sense. Suddenly, it had become too quiet. No matter what happened in my life these last few weeks, it always brought me a story whenever I held the book. There was something wrong. I could feel the tension in the room as Emily cowered in the corner, still unrelenting in her cautiousness. She eyed me with fear and trust, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something happened. Then I felt her. The little girl was there. She was there, but out of reach. The beast was breathing heavily now. Then I saw little Annabelle Wright. She was standing in the forest covered in dirt and blood. The blood was what concerned me the most. I let it go as I concentrated on her face. She was looking into my eyes, but she was not speaking. Instead, she seemed to be trying to tell me something with her eyes. They looked behind me and towards the beast, who panted now in anticipation. I was not aware that he was standing behind me so close. Then I saw her eye him, and then she ran away from us. The fear on her face told me what I needed to know, only it was too late. The beast shape-shifted into Edmund Wright. To my utter amazement, he jumped into the Read Me book and followed suit, pursuing his daughter. I stood in shock and anger at what had happened. I needed to help save Annabelle, but now I would have to find a way inside the book. Tears stained my cheeks as I collapsed to the ground. Emily, who had been seeing everything, was now at my side. I held her hand tightly as I came to grips with one story I would not be able to finish. It was one story that may never have an ending. I held the book in my hands and I screamed for it to save her, for it to show me how to save her. A child so afraid of her flesh and blood, and the reasons why even more terrible. She had gifts that her father wanted to take from her. It was the ultimate sin in my eyes. The book suddenly felt cold. It was no longer open, and would not open even for me. Put it away. Just put it away for now, Dad. Emily held my hand, unsure what to say. I had no choice, so I put it aside. The days went on, and I felt the coldness that the Read Me book was putting off. I felt as though I had betrayed it in some way, although I wouldn't have known the least, and I had no idea that that beast was indeed Edmund Wright, the evil doctor from Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum, also ex-husband of Izzy. My mind flashed in 1,000 different directions. Was Annabelle Izzy's daughter? I needed to see Izzy. I fell into a depression. There was nothing to look forward to now. It was though part of my very own soul left when the beast stole away the best part of me. The gifts I had seemed to vanish as well, and I felt as any day I would succumb to the book's punishment. Emily stayed with me for a few more days, and then she left and went home to her husband. I slept so much I was uncertain what was a dream and what was reality. I dreamt of Annabelle and the beast. I dreamt of my own life before I was adopted. Then I awoke in the middle of the night by a phone call. I rubbed my eyes, irritated that someone would wake me from my sleep. Hello? Robert? Said an older voice that I did not recognize. Yes, who is this? Izzy, I had the worst dream about you. I was calling to ensure everything was okay. I was worried you might be in danger. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. Izzy and I used to have an intense connection. The fact that she had picked up on the discontent I had earlier in the evening was a sign that our connection had restored itself after our meeting. I'm okay. But there's something that happened earlier. Edmund Wright was here, and he was, I know. He was infected years ago by something. He's been looking for a cure. That's why I'm so worried about you. Me? Why? What can I do? You have the power to find the answers he seeks. You see, we had a little girl all those years ago. She went missing in the woods. We looked, and we searched for days. And then those days turned into weeks. Finally, one day she came home covered in mud. There was something different about her, though. What? She had been attacked and infected by some sort of shape-shifting creature. It had the power to turn into anything, but it also had similar powers to yours. She could read minds. Annabelle was frightening when she would do it. It's why I ended up in Liberty Hill. There was something dark about her, and she stopped aging. One night, Edmund and I were asleep, and when we woke, she was standing over our bed covered in blood. When I got out of bed, I found our cat, Marty, dead. She had eaten it. I don't know what possessed our beautiful baby girl to do something so horrible. She just smiled at us, and then she began to change. That is when she attacked Edmund, spreading her evil to him. After that, he was never the same. I went to Liberty Hill where I felt safer, believe it or not. That is when I found you. I always wished I had my daughter back, but she was long gone. My God, Izzy, he had been trying to get the book from me. What does he know? Oh, I'm afraid he knows more than you think, I suspect. He doesn't have the power to do much with the book, or he would have stopped seeking you out. He tricked me into thinking he was protecting the little girl, our Annabelle. Well, what used to be Annabelle. He was trying to find a way to locate her to save himself? To save himself, he has to kill her. I don't think I can let him do that, even though she isn't my little girl anymore. I had no concrete answers for Izzy. I realized I had been tricked. I think we all had been tricked at that point. I knew what she was going through, but not to the extent she felt it to her core as a mother. I knew if anything ever happened to Emily, I would be devastated beyond words. 2 days later, I was sitting in my den, watching television, when a thought occurred to me. There was a reason the Read Me book sought me out. This whole time, I thought I had disappointed it in some way. That was why it was so cold towards me now. Yet it chose me for a reason. I knew then that the reason the book was so cold is that my story would have to be the last to be told. It couldn't tell me what had not happened yet. Now I would need to figure out my next move to save the day and the book from Annabelle and Edmund. Read Me, Part 13, final. The air was brisk and the fields smelt of spring. The flowers had just begun to peek out, little by little, in the area behind my house. I sat in a corner on my porch, thinking of the best way to approach the situation. I watched as the first signs of bees and a giant swarm of black ants began their dance to the new spring that awaited them. Still, in deep thought about my life, I thought about how it affected so many. What did I remember in those days in the asylum? I had barely tipped the iceberg with this whole encounter that now awaited me. It had not occurred so early as I once thought. It was much later, closer to the 1950s when I was there. In my mind, I was reading the story of another little boy trying to separate the truth from the fiction my mind had gifted me. I thought of what minor powers I had left, and how I had found them in that book. If I couldn't get inside of it, how could I, if that Read Me book was not giving me its stories to open me to the great themes and lessons it had bestowed upon me? I saw a crow sitting in a tree directly above me. "Don't you dare shit on my breakfast," I said, looking up at it. Its caw, caw made me look up again. The big black crow tilted its head in my direction. I picked up a piece of my leftover English muffin with peach jam and tossed it into the patio. The crow swooped down and looked in my direction, tilting its head again before quickly grabbing the treat and flying away. I was just about to get up when I realized the thing had told all of his friends. Before I knew it, there was a murder of crows making their music like the beat of a bad heavy metal band. I went into my house and searched the cupboard. I found some old croutons and some bread and tossed it to them. They didn't seem to mind my being there, and there was something that I could not place about them. There was a preternatural presence about them, as if more and more of them kept coming. When I finished, and out of bread, I noticed they lingered there for hours after. Finally, I went and opened my patio door. "All right, no more, go now," I said, but they would not go. By the following day, there were more crows. I thought it was odd, but after the experiences I had had over the last year, nothing struck me as strange anymore. By the early evening, there were so many crows that I couldn't see my house or my lawn. I knew then it was something related to the Read Me book. I closed my eyes, hoping that some of my powers were still with me. Without the connection to the book, I assumed my powers would dissipate with it. To my utter amazement, I was dead wrong. I felt myself back in the hospital where I resided with Izzy. I saw it then, myself as a youngster, and the power I had even then. There was no mistaking that I was meant to have the Read Me book. Now I would finish it once and for all. I recalled one story in the back of the book, one I had never been able to read. It had never shown itself to me. I went towards the Read Me book, which is when I felt myself come alive, not the book. I could see only the chapter in my mind. Had it been there before? Had this chapter been there always? I recalled as if I simply had forgotten it, but I knew it had found itself in my mind when I channeled something. Then I heard a voice. It was a woman with a deep voice, yet it was pleasing to the ears. I opened my eyes and suddenly I could hear her and see her. I was literally in her home. It was small, a little cottage with flowers and herbs all about. There were things in jars as well. Then I heard her. "Sit," she said. Then I saw it in my mind's eye. Another story was about to play out. All witches burn. My name is Adele. You're Robert, are you not? She asked me. I realized I could not see her face. She was covered with a heavy black hood. The only thing I could make out was her old hands as they clutched a grouping of black crow feathers. She was tying them together, putting them in a bundle, and then adding herbs from her jars and flowers as well. Robert Zephyr is your name, and you are a witch. I can assure you I am no such thing. Oh, but you are. You are also my great-grandson. Robert, you came from a long line of powerful sorcerers. How can you not see your gifts? Now, son, tell me what's troubling you. I looked at her as she sat down and took my hands. Suddenly, I felt the connection, and it was intense. It brought tears to my eyes. I had never felt something so deeply profound, and that is when I saw my great-grandmother's story unfolding. I'm trying to understand why these magical things are happening to me. She let out a deep breath, and I felt her touch my hand with her long, bony fingers as she began to tell me a story. Once upon a time, I was young and beautiful. My mother had died giving birth to me. My father kept my gifts for me in an attempt to help me fit in. I never fit in. I was never one of them. So my gifts, much like yours, stayed dormant most of my life, until I reached the age of 17. That is when my fate changed. Not for the better. There was a young man I was in love with. His name was Hugh, and I felt he loved me as well. But it was not meant to be. I was poor and not a good match for him. In those days, the men had to marry wealthy, if they were not as well off to support his 9 sisters. It seemed crazy in this modern age, I suppose, but there is intelligence in securing your future. So he was married to Emma Castile. She was a beautiful woman, and wealthy beyond anything a man could ever ask for. Over time, she grew ugly and mean-spirited because Hugh never loved her as much as he had loved me. I had given up on Hugh and remarried a man who was a sailor. We had 1 son. While they were out to sea, I sat waiting for my husband and son to come back. I spent my evenings teaching some of the young girls in town how to make baskets. So one night I was helping a young lady make baskets for a church bazaar when I had a knock at the door. I was shocked to see that it was Emma, and she had a most saddened look upon her face. I sent my young friends away and asked Emma to sit down by my hearth. She was wet from the rain and the snow outside, and she wasted no time in telling me what the matter was. She spoke so low, so much, I could barely hear her. Hugh is missing, she finally said. I looked at her, and then panic hit me like a punch in the gut. Not my Hugh. I had spoken to myself. Why do you think he's missing? I asked her. We went hunting with 3 men in town, and that was 2 days ago. I fear that something bad has happened. I know you have abilities. I'm only here for your help. I know you loved him once upon a time. Emma said this to me as a single tear fell from her left eye. I never liked showing others what abilities I had, but this was Hugh. So I went to my shelves and pulled out a vial. I tossed it inside a jar and then picked up a few rose leaves, rosemary and thyme. I added them to the jar and then blew into it, after which it began to smoke and it began to bubble. I took down the mirror that hung on my wooden wall and laid it upon my table. I poured the mixture all over it. Then I saw figures emerge from the mirror. The smoke rose and began taking the shape of human beings. Then, with the colors of the liquid, they began to form into Hugh and the other men. I was able to watch them and see what they were doing as if they were really there in my home. Emma watched with amazement, and then we both cried as we saw Hugh get attacked by a creature. The other men tried to help, but to our amazement, they left Hugh all alone. Perhaps these men went to get help, I had said to her. Then we saw him, and he was dying. So I looked at Emma, and she looked at me, begging me to help him. I grabbed her hand and cut it, letting the blood fall into the mirror. She screamed, but I held her in place as the blood in the stream fell upon the figure of smoke and an effigy of Hugh. Soon I began to feed him the energy of her life force. I used my power to strengthen hers. Within what seemed like mere seconds, he was awake and on his way home to her. After this, she fearfully thanked me, running out the door. I knew then there would be some sort of repercussion. She didn't even seem remotely sincere in her gratefulness. Days later, I saw Hugh at my door. I had no idea why he was there, but then Emma had told him. He was so grateful for my actions, he kissed me. I was overcome with shock and unable to understand what was happening. Then he told me he loved me and would never stop loving me. When he left, I shut the door and I cried. It was then that I received another knock at my door. It was Emma again. She was angry. She had seen Hugh's turn of affection on me. I couldn't stop what was to come next. By the next day, I was being dragged into the streets by merciless men as the women threw stones at me. I looked at Emma and then at Hugh. He was crying, but could not come to my aid. And that is when I cursed him. Upon my death, you will wake tomorrow morning as a beast that walks on 2 legs and cannot crawl, cannot change back to man, cannot carry fire, and never again will know any love, only pain. That is when they tied me to a stake, upside down. They burnt my head and eyes first, then the rest of my body. I screamed and I screamed until I could not hear my screams any longer. My husband and son were devastated by my death, and my husband lived in guilt till his dying day that he wasn't there to save me that morning. Hugh woke the next day cursed to walk as a beast, and he could never go home to his beloved Emma, the treacherous bitch. Only my curse had consequences. That man that you saw turn into a beast. He was a descendant of Hugh, and carried with him that darkness. The one you are fighting against now, my grandson. Hugh's great-grandson is the man you call Edmund, has been ill-fated with that curse. I looked at her, and then felt her arms around me. You only get rid of the curse and release them when you see them without pain. I looked at my great-grandmother's face as she began to fade from my view. Then I saw it. I knew then how to save the child and restore Edmund right to his human form for good. I had tears in my eyes as I realized what needed to be done. I thought about all those stories and how my account would be the last. I stood up and walked over to my desk. I sat down and I composed a letter. Then I opened the README book. Closing my eyes, I allowed myself to become part of its pages. I concentrated on the little girl and her angry father. The entire universe as I knew it came into view. I could feel my body splitting apart and turning into atoms. I was now molecules. I was part of the wind, the earth, the sea. Every memory was now energy that was once my life force. Then I saw Edmund. His beastly figure held the little girl in his arms as though he would devour her. Yet when he saw me, I was part of the wind and the sea that overtook him. Suddenly my body's molecules flew like insects, sharp, and split him in half, freeing the little girl. I used what part of me still could concentrate, and the energy became a doorway, allowing her to be free once and for all from all of that hideousness and that curse. I knew my Izzy would finally be able to rest. I had saved her little girl. I found myself glowing inside of a crow's eye as the sun hit it, and I could now see everything. Then I saw the book, and it closed, shutting out the rest of the world like a tomb. I was able to see her and hear her as she read my letter. Dear Emily, I know you will never understand why I sacrificed myself. I just want you to know I love you. I also want you to know that I'll be here to tell you my story when you're ready. Love, Dad. Emily closed the letter and then picked up the book and looked at my fish, smiling. She took both of them home with her. The end. Or is it? Hello, everyone. I'm losing my voice today. I just wanted to thank you all for listening to all of the parts of the Read Me series. And I do feel like there might be some additional parts that I will be writing very soon to maybe add to that lovely story. And thank you all so very much for enjoying the story, for listening to it, and stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to be narrating a single story as soon as I figure out which one I'm going to read. I have a couple of choices that I'm not sure which one yet. Other than that, thank you again, and you have a wonderful day and a happy week. Hopefully it's less busy than mine is about to be. Take care. Love, KB.